Meme arrow thread. Mate of mine likes to go sailing off the coast, spending an afternoon on the water. Hears a splash beside the boat and looks over the side. Sees a woman's face, clear as day through the water. A pale redhead. Her eyes are even sparkling in the bright sunlight. Strikingly beautiful. She's mouthing something, like she's trying to talk. Her face recedes into the darkness of the water, like something slowly pulls her down. Friend is shocked, and decides to head back to shore. Sees some activity back where the other boats are. A small crowd of people bustling about. A woman drowned. My mate recognizes her as the woman in the water. Overcome with a deep sorrow, he leaves the crowd and rushes into his boat. He cries for a long time. He said the sadness he felt was unreal. It was like losing a loved one. But after a certain point, he just felt normal again, and wondered why the fuck he'd gotten so emotional. Here's one about my grandma's crazy, abusive stepmom. My grandma is a tiny 4'10" woman. Nicest person I know. Compassionate, incredibly humble. Mom tells me it's because she grew up with a literal wicked stepmother. Described her as evil. Mom grew up around her too. I asked Grandma about this one day. She tells me that her stepmother was very abusive. Apparently, Grandma's dad traveled for work. He'd be gone for weeks at a time. During that time, her stepmom would put Grandma through hell. Grandma proceeds to tell me the following story. When she was still a little girl, her stepmom told her that she had a severed head hidden away somewhere. This severed head could talk, and it told stepmom secrets. Stepmom told Grandma that if Grandma ever lied or misbehaved, the head would rat her out. Naturally, Grandma grew up nervous about doing anything bad. Stepmom would ask her to do the most insane shit, and Grandma would just do it, no questions asked. One example she gave was that her stepmom asked her to walk 10 miles away to retrieve water from a creek in a little container. Stepmom laid down some rules. Grandma wasn't allowed to set the container of water down anywhere, and she couldn't drink any of it, and she couldn't take any of her own water either. So basically, Grandma had to walk 10 miles in the blistering heat, then 10 miles straight back, all without any water, and all without stopping to rest, or she'd technically be setting the water down. And she had to do this all for a little bit of water, even though they had a water well out behind her house. Stepmom would always be waiting by the well for Grandma to get home. Sometimes she beat her, sometimes she didn't. Didn't matter how perfectly Grandma followed the instructions. But she could always tell when a beating was coming, because stepmom would be pacing by the well, looking agitated. She'd claim, "The head told me what you did," and beat the fuck out of Grandma for no reason. As she got a little older, Grandma started developing a spine, asserting herself a bit more. Stepmom responded by telling her the story about how she got the severed head. Said it belonged to her ex-husband. Stepmom slit his throat one night while he was sleeping. To avoid suspicion from her neighbors, she slashed her own arms and legs. Blamed her husband's death on a group of bandits, claiming they tortured them both. Stepmom showed Grandma the scars where she cut herself. Said that if Grandma didn't act right, she'd make another severed head out of her dad. And maybe one out of you. Grandma ran out of the house crying. Stepmom laughing like a maniac as she ran off. Grandma ended up in the woods. She sat under a tree for a long time, crying, until she wore herself out and fell asleep. When she woke up, it was after dark. She had been there for hours. She got up and hurried home. She gets closer to the house. She's quiet, so as to not wake stepmom. She's slowly approaching the water well behind the house when she hears two voices. Can't really hear them at first. Eases closer and can just make out stepmom standing by the water well. Sounds like she's talking to someone, but Grandma doesn't see anyone there. There's definitely another voice though, which Grandma doesn't recognize. But her first thought is, she's talking to the head. In Grandma's mind, the head knows everything, and it's the main reason she's terrified of stepmom. So she panics at first, thinking the head knows she's there, eavesdropping, and that it's going to tell her stepmom. But apparently, that doesn't happen, so Grandma keeps listening. Stepmom keeps talking, the other voice answers. Stepmom's just asking a bunch of weird questions that don't make much sense. The voice speaks really slow and has a deep voice. Grandma is suddenly curious about what it looks like. She tries to get closer, but all she can see is the well and stepmom's silhouette in the dark. Then the other voice says clearly, "Someone is listening." Grandma freezes. Stepmom's silhouette ducks quickly down behind the well. It pops back up and looks around, then hurries away towards the house and disappears inside. Grandma stays perfectly still for a long time. She's worried that her stepmom might secretly be watching from the house, but she's also thinking that it looks like she put something down on the ground before she left. She thinks she left the head behind. After a long while standing still, Grandma slowly begins approaching the well, crawling along the ground. She reaches the well, and her hand feels a strange patch of grass. She feels around. It's a pile of dead grass and leaves. It's covering something. Grandma feels around some more. There's a small handle underneath. She tugs at it. A door lifts up. It's a secret compartment in the soil. Down on the ground about 2 feet deep is a wooden box. Grandma thinks this is what she keeps the head in. She's almost afraid to touch it, but she lifts it out of the ground. It's very heavy. Places it down on the ground next to her. She actually whispers, "Hello?" thinking it might answer, but nothing happens. She wants to look inside but can't bring herself to. She decides she's going to get rid of this evil thing. Still worried that her stepmom might be watching, Grandma crawls on her hands, keeping to the shadows. She lugs the heavy box behind her as she goes until she's a good distance from the house. She remembers a huge empty tree trunk that she passed in the woods earlier and decides it's a good place to dump the thing. She hurries into the woods as fast as she can, carrying this heavy box, and dumps it into the hollow tree trunk. Then, she slowly makes her way back home. When she gets there, her stepmom is wide awake, sitting at the table. She asks Grandma where she's been. Grandma tells the truth. "I've been asleep in the woods." Usually stepmom either flies into a rage or threatens to ask the severed head if she's lying. But instead, she just orders Grandma to bed. The next night, Grandma sneaks out of the house, returns to the tree trunk where she stashed the box and retrieves it, sets it on fire, makes sure it's totally burned down before she heads back. The next morning, her stepmother can't get out of bed. Grandma checks on her and finds her face looks warped. Said it looks sideways, like her mouth was entirely on one side of her face. After that, stepmom was always very frail. The severe beatings pretty much stopped. Grandma was never sure if it was actually a head inside the box. She never found any bones when she burned it. But I know what I heard at the well, and she wasn't alone out there. My great-aunt tells this story, and others in the family corroborated this. Not quite horror, but damn weird. Great-uncle loses his leg, gets a wooden leg to replace it, buries his actual leg in the backyard, wrapped in a blanket or two, and then inside of a wooden box. Has a good sense of humor about it. Uses the wooden leg to freak out kids that would come over. One day his leg starts itching. The one he's missing. Constant fucking itching. Phantom limb shit. Tries to deal with it various ways. Nothing works. Weeks of this. So fucking itchy. Holy shit, make it stop. Finally exhaust ideas of making it stop. Can't take the itching anymore. Fuck it, I'm digging it up. Digs up his old leg. Box is rotted through. Leg is covered in ants. Those motherfuckers. Blast all the ants off of it with a hose. Itching stops when he does this. Reburies leg. This time sealed it way better. Never bothers him again. Reburies leg this time, way better sealed. Still a good story, Anon. Thanks for the OC. Thanks, man. I always thought so. I want to be the OC I want to see in the board, so here's another, and I'll post more if I can think of some that fit the criteria here. Be old friend of mine. Early teens in Florida. Playing airsoft with friends after school in an open field. Out in the middle of nowhere. It's basically just a field of sand and dirt with some scattered bushes with long thin leaves. I'm shit with plant names, but the things are everywhere in Florida. Almost look like the top of palm trees, but the leaves are just long, thin, single slivers. No branches. All connected in the center, like a pom-pom. They stand about 2 feet high or so. Been playing around for an hour or so. Crouch behind a bush to hide and reload. Bush starts shaking violently. Not like the wind, but like someone grabbed the base and just shook the hell out of it. Leaps up and faces attacker. Everyone is just shooting each other, like 20 feet away, having a good time. Quickly backs away from the shaking bush, calls friends over. All just silently staring at this spasming bush. There's no wind. After staring at it for a minute in confusion, every other bush in the field starts to do this. Just shaking like fucking hell on a windless day. Everyone feels the wrongness of it at the same time, and they haul ass out of there. None of them want to talk about it after. Still don't know what the hell that was. Bushes are thin and small. Knows it wasn't animals because he could see right into the plants and there was nothing. Has had ghost type events happen to him at other occasions, but still recalls this as the most unsettling thing that's ever happened to him because it made no sense at all and just felt threatening and wrong. Something not paranormal, but that has bugged me since it happened is that I saw this kid's face on the news one time. I recognized him. I'd seen him on and off at this park near my job. I know I'm going to get called a faggot for this story, but whatever. There's this park by my old job. It's a well-known cruising spot in the gay scene. I find out about it through my boss, who is this really raunchy older gay man. He described how guys have been going there to blow/fuck each other since the 70s or something. I got curious and drove around there one day to see if I could spot any unusual activity. I was surprised how blatant it was. There was these little secluded areas in the park where you could just park your car and you'd be shielded on basically all sides by thick trees and tall grasses. So cars would pull in there and park. Then the drivers would prop their doors open and just sit there, which seemed to be a signal that they were looking for some action. Passing cars would see this and pull in. They too would park, and the driver would walk over to the vehicle with an open door and proceed to blow the dude inside. Couldn't see the actual act, but it's obvious that's what was happening. Anyway, I was hooked on this shit because of how sleazy it was, and I'd find myself randomly going to the park at a morbid fascination. Once, I saw this guy who was really young. As in way too young, maybe 14 or 15. I was parked nearby and he was coming out of the woods. He stood at the tree line watching the cars for a while. I figured maybe he was just a curious gay teen watching the older men blow each other. Kinda weird, but whatever. I'm in no position to judge. After that, I'd see this kid periodically. One time I watched as a man went over to him and the two disappeared into the woods. After this, anytime I saw the kid, he'd be disappearing into the woods with a much older man. Then one day, a few months later, I saw his face in the news. Right away my stomach dropped. I knew what it was before the news anchors even said it. Raped and murdered. I have no idea why, but I felt responsible. Like I should have interceded or something. I don't know what I would have even done, but fuck, I carried a ton of guilt about that for a long time. Be 8-year-old kid in the 90s. At a friend's house after school. Friend's family has an extensive VHS collection. We're going to go through them trying to find a movie to watch. Friend gets called upstairs by his dad. Dad was a bit of a hard ass. I think he was in trouble for something. Continue going through VHS tapes. Finally find one I want to watch. I think it was one of the Ernest movies. Lol. Except the tape inside doesn't match the cover. It's missing the label with the movie title. Put it inside the VCR. It's a home movie. Looks like they must have set up a tripod in the doorway of the living room because you can see the whole room in a wide shot. Dad and Mom are sitting on the couch spaced apart. Friend and his sister are each in a chair opposite them. Wait 30 seconds for something to happen. Nothing does. Press fast forward. They're literally just sitting there, not even talking or moving. Get the feeling there's something weird and fucked up about this. Hear friends coming downstairs. Quickly eject the tape and put it back. Never ask him about it. He moves away. Still think about this sometimes. Since this thread is still up, I'm going to throw something out that happened last night. I'm more wondering what you guys think this might have been. Fast asleep. A sudden loud sound wakes me up immediately. Something just outside my window. Sounds like a very large dog sort of coughing and dry heaving at the same time. Very deep, kinda, and almost bubbly. I'm jolted awake, but not scared. It's just the sound was so jarring that it woke me up the instant I heard it. Listen to this weird cough hacking / bubbling sound. My first thought is I'm dreaming, so I get out of bed. I'm wide awake. My cat, who sleeps on the bed with me, was frozen stiff, staring at the window. Again, I'm not scared at all, so I go to peek out my blinds to see what the fuck the sound is. Definitely sounds animal, so I'm expecting to find a stray or something. As soon as I open the blinds, I'm fucking terrified. No cause for it, just instantly afraid. There's nothing outside. The sound has stopped. I'm just staring through the window, afraid to move. Feel like something's looking back at me. I almost feel like throwing up. Back away from the window. Still looking at it when I hear the same gurgling cough sound again. It literally sounds like a huge animal is doing it, but there was nothing there. I back up into bed and lie there listening to it, wondering if anybody else hears it. Eventually stops and I don't hear it again. Feel too afraid to sleep. My rational mind just wants to say this was pipes in my house acting up, but I heard it outside my window. What the fuck? Here's a story that I've never shared before. It's not really paranormal, but it scares the living shit out of me. 17 years old. Been smoking weed regularly with a couple of guys from college. I'm from the UK. We start college at 16. For a year now. One of the guys usually drives and we smoke up in the field that's deserted at night. Driver gets a call from someone. He starts freaking out, literally laying on the floor screaming down the phone. Never heard screaming like that before. It was fucking terrifying. He's not even making sense. He's like writhing around on the floor and screaming down the phone. Starts doing this weird fucking laughing, all bug-eyed and weird. Calmly puts his phone in his pocket. Climbs very tall fence for a tennis court. Jumps off, lands on his neck, and fucking kills himself. Guy hung around with every day for a year just up and kills himself because of a phone call, and none of us know who it was on the other end. I wish I was making this up, but it fucked me up for a while afterwards. The other guy we were with started using ketamine regularly. We're both 21 now, and he's completely screwed in the head. I was on medication for a while, but came off it quickly. The police put it down to a stoned idiot climbing the fence. They interviewed us both once, and that was it. I never even heard from his family. They moved out of the country pretty quickly. I still have his younger brother on Facebook. I buried the memory away somewhere in my brain and just try to ignore it. But whenever my phone rings and I don't have the number saved, then I always get a horrible feeling and I never answer. I'm not even explaining how fucking weird this guy was acting when he answered his phone. It was horrible. The fucking noises he was making were so fucking disgusting I can't even try to explain it because it makes me feel physically sick.